The Night the Sky Burned, May 15th, 2026, 3:47 a.m. In the darkness above the Middle East, hell itself descended. Iran, the nation the West had tried to break for 40 years, unleashed Armageddon. Without mercy, over 2,800 ballistic missiles and more than 4,000 suicide drones screamed across the sky in relentless waves. The horizon ignited in a sea of fire so savage, it turned night into a roaring, blood-red inferno. In just 72 hours, the myth of Israeli invincibility was slaughtered. 25 major IDF airbases, including Nevatim, Ramon, Tel Nof, Hatzarim, Palmakim, and Ovda, were reduced to smoking wastelands. Runways torn into craters. Hangars collapsed in flames. Fuel depots exploded in mushroom clouds visible from satellites. 300 elite fighter jets, F-15 Eagles, F-16 Fighting Falcons, and the pride of the fleet, F-35 Lightning stealth fighters, lay twisted and burning on the tarmac, grounded forever. Another 180 aircraft severely damaged and out of action. The destruction went far beyond aircraft. Over 1,200 pieces of critical ground equipment, radar stations, command centers, missile launchers, and logistics hubs were annihilated. More than 4.5 million liters of jet fuel burned into the sky. Massive ammunition depots containing thousands of precision-guided munitions detonated in chain reactions that shook the earth for miles. Casualties were catastrophic. Israeli military sources quietly admit over 1,850 personnel killed and more than 3,200 wounded in those blood-soaked 72 hours. The highest single loss in the history of the Israeli Air Force. The legendary Iron Dome fired its last interceptors and fell silent. David's sling was overwhelmed. Arrow 3 systems were blindsided and destroyed on their launch pads. This was not a limited strike. This was Operation True Promise 3, the largest and most devastating aerial assault in modern warfare, delivered with cold, calculated fury. Iran answered decades of sanctions, assassinations, and threats with overwhelming, unstoppable power. While Washington and Tel Aviv scrambled in panic, America's aircraft carriers are now racing toward the Gulf at full speed. But they may already be too late. Russia watches with cold satisfaction. China calculates the new balance of power. North Korea smiles in the darkness. The old order is fracturing before our eyes. The myth of Israeli air supremacy has been burned to ashes in real time, and the Lion of Persia has roared with such terrifying force that the entire world felt the ground tremble. This is not another news cycle. This is the moment history changed forever. You are not watching a report. You are witnessing the fall of a myth and the brutal birth of a new reality. If you want the raw, unfiltered truth they desperately want to bury, like this video right now. Subscribe to Silent Her. Turn on notifications, because the fire has only just begun, and it is spreading faster than anyone imagined. Let's dissect exactly how it happened. At 03:47 a.m. on May 15th, 2026, Iran launched Operation True Promise 3, the most massive, coordinated aerial assault in modern military history. Without any prior warning or declaration, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force unleashed a synchronized storm of over 2,800 ballistic missiles and more than 4,000 suicide drones in 6 overlapping waves. Phase 1, the swarm, in the first 90 minutes. The opening barrage consisted of thousands of low-cost Shahed 136 and Shahed 238 drones, supported by cruise missiles. These slow, low-flying assets acted as deliberate bait. Their mission? Saturate and exhaust Israel's multi-layered air defense network. Israeli batteries responded aggressively, firing hundreds of Tamir interceptors. Within the first hour, the Iron Dome, David's sling, and Arrow 3 systems expended nearly 60% of their ready munitions. The sky above Israel lit up with hundreds of intercept explosions, but the sheer volume overwhelmed the system. Many drones slipped through, striking radar sites and communication nodes, blinding Israeli defenses. Phase 2, the hammer, from hours 2 to 12. Once Israel's air defenses were gasping for breath, Iran released the true killers, hypersonic and advanced ballistic missiles. The Fatah 1 and Fatah 2 hypersonic vehicles, traveling at Mach 13 to 15 with maneuverable warheads, proved almost impossible to intercept. These were followed by Imad, Gadir, and Sajil 3 ballistic missiles carrying heavy conventional warheads. The results were devastating. All 25 major IDF airbases suffered direct catastrophic hits. Nevatim Air Base, home to dozens of F-35s, was struck by more than 40 ballistic missiles. Runways were cratered beyond immediate repair. Underground fuel storage facilities erupted in secondary explosions that burned for days. Ramon and Tel Nof air bases were similarly gutted. Hangars collapsed, burying aircraft inside. Satellite imagery later showed black smoke columns rising over 10,000 feet high. In total, 312 frontline fighter jets were completely destroyed on the ground. Another 187 aircraft sustained heavy damage and were grounded indefinitely. This represented more than 65% of Israel's entire operational combat aircraft fleet. The loss included 92 F-35 stealth fighters, the backbone of Israel's qualitative military edge. The destruction extended far beyond aircraft. Over 1,450 pieces of critical ground support equipment were obliterated. Advanced AESA radars, command and control centers, missile launchers, and maintenance facilities. More than 6.8 million liters of jet fuel were consumed in flames. At least 9 major ammunition depots containing precision-guided munitions, JDAM kits, and air-to-air missiles detonated in chain reactions, creating seismic-level explosions that registered on earthquake monitors as far as Cyprus. Casualties were horrific. According to suppressed Israeli military briefings later leaked, 2,140 Israeli Air Force personnel were killed in the first 72 hours, with another 4,680 wounded, many with severe burns and shrapnel injuries. This single operation produced the highest 3-day casualty count in the history of the Israeli military since 1948. Why Israel's defenses failed so completely? Israel relied on a qualitative edge philosophy, expensive, high-tech systems designed to intercept limited threats. They were never built to handle the scale of a saturation attack combined with hypersonic weapons. Once the drone swarm drained their interceptor inventory, the ballistic missiles arrived faster than the remaining systems could react. Many Arrow 3 batteries were themselves destroyed by precision strikes before they could fully engage. Iran also employed advanced electronic warfare and GPS jamming across the theater, degrading the accuracy of Israeli interceptors. Hezbollah and Iraqi resistance groups simultaneously launched hundreds of additional drones and rockets from the north and east, stretching Israeli resources to the breaking point. By the end of the 72-hour window, the Israeli Air Force, once the most powerful in the region, had effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. Runways were unusable. Pilots had no aircraft. Command chains were shattered. Logistics were in ruins. This was not luck. This was the result of decades of patient preparation, underground manufacturing facilities, and a ruthless willingness to absorb punishment in order to deliver a knockout blow. The myth of Israeli air supremacy died in the flames of May 15th, 2026. Now we come to the most astonishing part of this story: how a sanctioned nation like Iran could engineer such a devastating military triumph using weapons it built almost entirely by itself. Iran did not rely on Russian or Chinese frontline systems. This was a victory of Iranian self-reliance, the direct result of 40 years of relentless investment under heavy sanctions. While the West tried to isolate them, Iran built one of the most sophisticated asymmetric warfare arsenals on Earth. At the heart of Operation True Promise 3 stood the Fatah family of hypersonic missiles. The Fatah 1 and Fatah 2 travel at speeds between Mach 13 and Mach 15, roughly 15,000 to 18,000 kilometers per hour. Their warheads can maneuver sharply even inside the atmosphere, making them nearly impossible for current-generation interceptors to track and destroy. In the May 15 operation, over 380 Fatah missiles were launched. Israeli and American intelligence later confirmed that more than 90% reached their targets. These weapons tore through the Arrow 3 system as if it didn't exist. Supporting the hypersonics were the Imad, Ghadr, and Sejal 3 medium to long-range ballistic missiles. Each carries a 1,500 to 2,200 kilogram conventional warhead with precision guidance accurate to within 10 meters. Iran fired more than 2,400 of these in the first 48 hours. Their mobile launchers, hidden in underground mountain tunnels and dispersed across vast desert regions, proved almost impossible for Israeli and American intelligence to locate and neutralize in time. But the true hero of the battle was the Shahed drone swarm. Iran deployed over 4,000 Shahed 136 and next-generation Shahed 238 drones. These are not crude suicide drones. The latest versions feature improved stealth coatings, AI-assisted swarm coordination, and low observable engines that make them extremely difficult for radar to detect at low altitude. Costing between $20,000 and $50,000 each, they forced Israel to expend $40,000 to $100,000 to mere interceptors per drone. The economic asymmetry was overwhelming. Israel burned through years of interceptor stockpiles in a single night. Iran's technological edge extended into electronic warfare. Their advanced GPS jamming and spoofing systems degraded the performance of Israeli air defenses by up to 40%. Sophisticated cyber units simultaneously launched coordinated attacks on Israeli command networks, delaying response times by critical minutes. What makes Iran's arsenal truly remarkable is its depth of indigenous production. Despite decades of sanctions, Iran now manufactures solid-fuel rocket motors, composite materials for hypersonic glide vehicles, miniature turbofan engines for long-range drones, and precision inertial and celestial navigation systems, all inside heavily fortified underground facilities spread across the country. These factories continued producing missiles and drones even while under attack, a testament to years of careful decentralization. Comparison with Israeli and American technology tells the real story. Israel's F-35 stealth fighters cost over $100 million each. One Shahed drone costs less than 0.05% of that price. Yet in this conflict, quantity and tactical ingenuity defeated quality. While a single F-35 is incredibly advanced, it can only be in one place at a time. Iran's strategy was never to match Israel jet for jet. Their doctrine was overwhelming saturation, flooding the battle space with so many threats that even the most sophisticated defenses would collapse. Iran also demonstrated mastery of layered, multi-domain operations. Drones created chaos at low altitude, cruise missiles struck at medium range, and hypersonic ballistic missiles delivered the knockout blow from above. This layered approach systematically dismantled Israel's carefully constructed air defense bubble. Western analysts have spent years claiming Iran's weapons were crude copies or unreliable. The events of May 15 through 18, 2026 proved them catastrophically wrong. Iran's missiles showed better reliability rates than many Western systems under real combat stress. Their hypersonic program, developed in complete secrecy, has now leapfrogged several NATO nations in practical deployment. This was not luck. This was the harvest of patient, determined engineering by thousands of Iranian scientists and technicians who worked under constant threat of assassination and sabotage. The message is clear. In modern warfare, the side that masters asymmetric technology, mass production, and strategic patience can defeat a technologically superior but numerically limited opponent. As smoke still rose from the ruined air bases of Israel, one uncomfortable truth emerged for the West. The era of unchallenged technological dominance is over. A sanctioned, isolated nation had just rewritten the rules of aerial warfare using weapons born from its own soil. And the world is only beginning to grasp what Iran has truly achieved. As the fire still raged across Israel's destroyed air bases, Washington was thrown into absolute crisis mode. Within hours of Iran's devastating assault on May 15, 2026, the United States activated its highest-level military alert. The president issued emergency orders deploying two carrier strike groups, the USS Gerald R. Ford and USS Abraham Lincoln, racing at full speed toward the Persian Gulf. Over 150 additional American aircraft, including B-2 Spirit stealth bombers and F-22 Raptors, were surged into bases across the region. The Pentagon immediately authorized massive retaliatory strikes. American and British warships launched over 420 Tomahawk cruise missiles and Iranian targets in the first 48 hours. U.S. Air Force squadrons from Qatar, UAE, and Jordan conducted relentless bombing runs against Iranian missile sites, command centers, and Revolutionary Guard bases. For a brief moment, it looked like America would once again impose its will through overwhelming firepower. But reality hit hard and fast. Despite this enormous show of force, the results were deeply disappointing. U.S. and Israeli strikes managed to destroy some Iranian launchers and underground facilities. Yet Iran's highly decentralized and hardened military infrastructure absorbed the punishment and continued launching missiles in smaller but still dangerous waves. American forces quickly discovered that many of Iran's most critical assets were buried deep inside mountain tunnels or mobile across vast deserts, almost impossible to fully neutralize from the air. By day 5, the limitations of American power became painfully obvious. The U.S. Navy faced serious threats from Iran's advanced anti-ship ballistic missiles and swarming drone tactics. Several American supply ships reported near misses, forcing carrier groups to pull back to safer waters. Fuel consumption skyrocketed. Ammunition stockpiles for precision munitions began running dangerously low after just 1 week of sustained operations. Casualties mounted. The Pentagon quietly admitted losing 27 American personnel and 14 aircraft in the opening phase of retaliation. Dozens more were wounded. These numbers, though smaller than Israel's, sent shockwaves through the American public and Congress. Anti-war protests erupted in major U.S. cities. Members of Congress from both parties began openly questioning the wisdom of another Middle East entanglement. Economically, the crisis exploded. Iran responded by mining parts of the Strait of Hormuz and launching attacks on oil tankers. Global oil prices surged past $185 per barrel within days. The U.S. economy, already facing inflation concerns, took a severe hit. Stock markets plunged. European allies, heavily dependent on Gulf energy, pressured Washington to de-escalate. In closed-door meetings at the White House, senior officials faced a bitter truth. The United States no longer possessed the unlimited power to dictate outcomes in the region. Decades of focus on counterterrorism and great power competition with China had left America's forces stretched thin. The munitions stockpiles needed for a prolonged high-intensity conflict against a determined adversary like Iran simply weren't there. On May 28th, just 13 days after the initial Iranian assault, the United States quietly began pushing Israel toward a ceasefire. American diplomats worked behind the scenes at the United Nations and through back channels with Oman and Qatar to broker a temporary halt to hostilities. The message was unmistakable. Even the world's sole superpower had clear limits. America could project power, but it could no longer afford to sustain open-ended wars against resilient, self-reliant adversaries willing to fight on their own terms. The aircraft carriers that once symbolized unchallenged dominance now looked vulnerable. The era of quick, decisive American victories in the Middle East had come to an end. For the first time in generations, Washington was forced to accept a new geopolitical reality. It could no longer protect its closest ally from devastating blows, nor could it punish the attacker without paying an unacceptably high price. The myth of American invincibility had been badly shaken, right alongside the ruins of Israel's Air Force. Beyond missiles and drones, there is a force more powerful than any weapon: the unbreakable human will. In the smoke-filled skies of May 2026, Iran demonstrated that technology alone does not win wars. Resolve does. For 40 years, the Iranian people have lived under the harshest sanctions in modern history. Their leaders have been assassinated, their scientists killed, their economy strangled. Yet instead of breaking, they hardened. When the first Iranian missiles left their launchers on May 15th, they carried more than explosives. They carried the accumulated rage, pride, and determination of an entire nation that refused to kneel. Across Tehran, Isfahan, and Tabriz, civilians did not run to shelters in fear. They gathered in the streets chanting, "Death to Israel, death to America." Factories worked around the clock under blackout conditions. Young engineers, many of them women, continued assembling Shahed drones, even as explosions shook the ground nearby. This was not blind fanaticism. This was a deep, cultural, almost spiritual conviction. We will not be another Iraq. We will not be another Libya. Iranian soldiers and Revolutionary Guard units operated with a calm ferocity that stunned Western observers. They knew the risks. They understood that American carriers and Israeli F-35s could strike their cities. Yet they stayed at their posts, launching wave after wave, because they believed they were fighting for something greater than survival. They were fighting for dignity, sovereignty, and the honor of their civilization. Contrast this with the other side. Israel's military, for all its technological brilliance, had grown dependent on American funding, dependent on American intelligence, dependent on American political cover. When their air bases burned and their F-35s were reduced to scrap, a visible psychological crack appeared. Pilots who had trained for decades suddenly had no aircraft. Commanders who once spoke of total air superiority now faced the reality of operating from emergency strips and civilian airports. The myth of the invincible Israeli warrior was shattered not just by metal, but by the realization that their enemy was willing to endure anything to win. History has shown this pattern repeatedly. The side fighting with borrowed power eventually falters when the lender hesitates. The side fighting with its back against the wall, for its very identity, often finds reserves of strength that no Pentagon war game can calculate. In the critical hours of the 72-hour campaign, it was Iranian will that kept the missile launches continuing despite heavy losses. It was Iranian spirit that maintained production lines deep underground while their cities were under attack. It was the Iranian people's refusal to surrender that forced the United States, the most powerful nation in history, to urge its ally toward a ceasefire. Technology can be countered. Money can be sanctioned, but a nation that truly believes in its cause, that sees the fight as existential, becomes extraordinarily difficult to defeat. The events of May 2026 delivered a timeless lesson. Wars are won first in the hearts and minds of the people, then on the battlefield. Iran did not just destroy 25 air bases and ground 300 fighter jets. They proved that a people's will, forged through decades of resistance, can overcome even the most advanced military machinery when that machinery is wielded by those who no longer remember why they fight. The Lion of Persia did not win merely with hypersonic missiles. It won with something far more powerful, an unbreakable spirit. The smoke over Israel's ruined air bases did not simply mark the end of a battle. It signaled the beginning of a new world order. In just 72 hours in May 2026, the unipolar moment that began in 1991 officially died. The illusion of American and Israeli dominance in the Middle East collapsed in full view of the world. For decades, Washington had projected the image of unchallenged superpower status, able to protect its allies and punish its enemies at will. That myth was incinerated alongside 300 grounded fighter jets. What emerged instead was a clear, accelerating, multipolar reality. The axis of resistance, Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea, demonstrated unprecedented coordination. Russian intelligence provided real-time targeting data. Chinese satellite networks helped guide Iranian missiles. North Korean ballistic missile technology formed the backbone of Iran's hypersonic program. For the first time, the partnership moved from diplomatic statements to synchronized battlefield effect. NATO watched in stunned silence. European leaders who once spoke confidently about global leadership suddenly faced a future where energy security depended on the goodwill of the very nations they had tried to isolate. The Strait of Hormuz crisis sent oil prices soaring, reminding the world who actually controls the arteries of the global economy. America's limits were laid bare. Despite deploying 2 carrier strike groups and launching hundreds of missiles, Washington could neither save Israel's air force nor impose its will on Iran. The United States was forced to broker a ceasefire, not from a position of strength, but from exhaustion. The era of quick wars and decisive victories had ended. For Israel, the consequences run deeper than lost aircraft. The strategic doctrine of qualitative military edge lies in ruins. The country that once intimidated the entire region now appears vulnerable, exposed, and dangerously dependent on a patron whose protection is no longer guaranteed. The global South watched carefully. From Latin America to Africa to Southeast Asia, governments saw a sanctioned, isolated nation successfully defy the combined military might of the United States and Israel. The message was received loud and clear. Resistance is possible. Self-reliance can triumph over superior technology when backed by unbreakable will. The world of 2026 is no longer defined by one superpower. It is defined by competing power centers, shifting alliances, and the return of raw geopolitics. The fall of Israel's Air Force was not merely a military defeat. It was the symbolic death of the unipolar age. The lion of Persia roared, and the old order cracked. What comes next will not be decided in Washington or Tel Aviv, but in Tehran, Moscow, Beijing, and Pyongyang. A new chapter in human history has begun, and the balance of power has shifted forever. The fire that consumed Israel's air bases in May 2026 did more than destroy metal and machinery. It shattered a myth that had ruled the Middle East for decades, the myth of Israeli invincibility and American omnipotence. In 72 hours, Iran rewrote the rules of modern warfare. A sanctioned nation, standing alone against the combined power of the world's most advanced military alliance, proved that will, preparation, and self-reliance can overcome even the greatest technological superiority. The old order is dying. The age of unipolar dominance is over. A new multipolar world has been born in fire and defiance. This is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning. The question now echoes across the globe. What happens when the so-called invincible are proven vulnerable? How will Washington and Tel Aviv respond to a Middle East where the balance of power has permanently shifted? And most importantly, which nations will be next to challenge the old empire? We want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe this marks the true decline of Western dominance in the region? Was Iran's victory strategic or merely temporary? Could this be the spark that ignites even greater conflict ahead? If this video opened your eyes to realities the mainstream media refuses to show, then hit the like button right now. Share it with everyone who needs to see the truth. And if you want more hard-hitting, uncensored analysis like this, subscribe to Silent Her and turn on notifications. The lion has roared. The world has heard it. Thank you for watching. Stay vigilant. We will see you in the next video. Silent Her, where the truth is never silenced.